You are looking at a picture of a recent press briefing by the U.S. Coast Guard about the Titan disaster. Like many others, I've been grimly fascinated by the progression of events, and yeah, it's a horrible tragedy. And yes, it's also this very strangely ironic coda to the story of the Titanic from 1912. Titanic, Titan, people going down to see the wreck of the Titanic so many years later also perishing. And this is now a permanent part of the Titanic story. No one will ever write a book about the Titanic in the future without mentioning the Titan. But the irony and the echoes don't end there, do they? Because really, the Titanic was a business venture, a money-making venture, and so was OceanGate's Titan, seen here. And even though the Titanic, of course, had customers of varying economic levels, the best remembered are the rich. The Titanic, of course, spared no expense in trying to attract the rich, and yeah, that's where they made their real money, presumably, just like sports stadiums make their real money with luxury boxes, etc., etc. And anyway, this is actually relevant to the point of the video. Like most people who have followed along with the story, I have no relevant expertise whatsoever when it comes to deep-sea diving, material science, engineering, all of that. What I do have, though, is a 20-plus years working as a project manager, and projects always have budgets, and I've played my little part in helping launch products, and products have profit margins. This is a picture of the Titanic's lifeboats, which of course famously were insufficient in number, by the way. Speaking of my day job, we get hit over the head repeatedly, and I have for decades, with the concept of root cause analysis. What's the real cause here, right? Well, I think the real cause of the OceanGate Titan disaster is not what the stories are leading with and talking about, not that those aren't important factors. Hubris, the new school economy, disruptor, break the rules type of mentality, and even the now infamous, and rightly so, carbon fiber hull. None of that is the real root cause. The desire for profit is, and the desire to maximize profit. It's only been a few days, but we now have more than enough proof to conclude conclusively that Stockton Rush, the CEO and man piloting the sub, cost the lives of his fellow passengers and customers through inexcusable negligence, and that negligence relates to, again, using that carbon fiber, designing a submersible that made many, many knowledgeable and experienced people worried. But why choose that? Well, I think it's for the same reason that Stockton Rush and company chose a very cheap video game controller to pilot the sub, and lights that came from a camping store. None of that was about shaking up the industry, skipping outdated regulations, or just even conventions and proving, well, you don't need any of that, etc., etc. No, it was just about maximizing how much you could net per trip after your initial investment. So let's read from various news articles and see if that conclusion is supportable. I'm just going to jump right in. It doesn't look like any other submersible that has gone down to the Titanic before. A lot of that has to do with how it's made. It's made with a carbon fiber hull as opposed to having a steel or titanium hull, and because it's carbon fiber, it could be made much larger, so it's actually quite a large submarine. Can hold 5 people, as opposed to most of the subs that go down to the Titanic. They can only hold 2 or 3, so it's actually quite spacious inside, as these kinds of subs go. There are real questions about carbon fiber in terms of its fatigue. How does it perform at these kinds of pressures? And that's enough from that source. Here's clips from, I'm going to read from clips from a television show, and here's a reporter talking to the CEO of OceanGate about the Titan. I think it'll be obvious which words are the TV show narration, which are the reporter, and which are Stockton Rush. There was no dashboard, just a touchscreen computer and a single power button. We only have one button, that's it. Wait a minute, I've seen submersibles, and there are banks of controls. Exactly, and this is to other submersibles what the iPhone was to the BlackBerry. But many of the components seemed surprisingly cheap. For views outside the sub, he had installed store-bought security cameras. And for the ceiling lights, I got these from Camper World. Then there was the steering unit. We run the whole thing with this game controller. Reporter laughs. Come on! So it seems like a lot of the way you made this is by taking off-the-shelf parts and sort of MacGyvering them together. Yeah, pretty much. Let's go to a different source. In April 2019, Carl Stanley, who runs his own deep-sea exploration company in Honduras, took a 12,000-foot plunge inside the Titan off the coast of the Bahamas and said he heard a large cracking sound during the 2-hour dive. The New York Times reported that Stanley shared his concerns with OceanGate CEO Stockton Rush in emails in which he said that the sounds revealed an area of the hull that is breaking down. Here is something else Stanley said. I think that hull has a defect near the flange that will only get worse. The only question in my mind is, will it fail catastrophically or not? Yet another source. In 2018, a company executive said that the Titan system couldn't detect flaws in the hull until milliseconds before disaster. He later accused the company in a lawsuit of firing him immediately after filing the report. In the same year, the Marine Technology Society sent Rush a letter expressing unanimous concern with the Titan. In 2021, Rush told a YouTuber that he knew he'd broken some rules by building his submersible out of carbon fiber, even though most submersibles are made purely out of steel or titanium. He said he wanted to innovate the industry, and in 2017 also said the material choice helped save money. And here are the details on that, back from when the Titan was first being envisioned. Metallic hulls, however, they are not buoyant in designs for depths of more than 2,000 meters. They present challenges when it comes to managing ballast. In particular, metal-hulled craft, so that means traditional ones, require the use of syntactic foam attached to the outside of the craft to achieve neutral buoyancy. Stockton Rush says the company had been evaluating the potential of using a carbon fiber composite hull since 2010, primarily because it permits creation of a pressure vessel that is naturally buoyant and, therefore, would enable OceanGate to forego the use and significant expense of synthetic foam on its exterior. By the way, the pictures you're now going to see are of that kind of very expensive foam, microscopic, and then one of the actual product, like if you and I were looking at a block of it. And while those are showing, I will read from the final bit I sourced for this video. Arnie Weissman, editor-in-chief of Travel Weekly. According to Weissman, Rush had bought the carbon fiber used to make the Titan at a big discount from Boeing because it was past its shelf life for use in airplanes. We're now quoting Weissman. I responded right away saying, "Don't you have any concerns about that?" He was very dismissive and said, "No, it's perfectly fine. Having all these certifications for airplanes is one thing, but the carbon fiber was perfectly sound." And lastly, from the same source, unsurprisingly, Boeing has distanced itself from the tragedy, saying that it was not a partner on the Titan and did not design or build it, as a spokesman told the newspaper. Interestingly, the company also found no record of any sale of composite material to OceanGate or its CEO. Well, I'm going to put aside the mystery of what exactly happened there and take Weissman at his word, admittedly, taking him at his word when he says that that's what Rush said. Regardless, I think the bottom line is we have yet again evidence of cost cutting. And the way it all comes together, and this is what I think hasn't been pointed out very much, is that this was all about finding a way to make a bigger sub. It's great that it was cheaper too, but cheaper and bigger both combined to make it more profitable. Remember, traditionally made submersibles had gone to the Titanic many, many times safely. But let's say OceanGate had used something like that or created something like that, well then they would, this is really simple arithmetic, they would only have 1 to 2 passengers per trip. And when each passenger is paying $250,000 or something like it, that's just this figure that's getting thrown around a lot, I get that, but the principle remains. When each single passenger of a very limited number is paying an exorbitant fee, then that really, really matters to your bottom line. The range of options we are talking about, from, 1 to 2 passengers to a solid 4 instead, we're talking about at a minimum twice as much money per trip. At a maximum, 4 times as much, and I think this is what really explains this 100% avoidable tragedy. Why the obsession with using unproven carbon fiber instead of more expensive, proven methods? Yeah, because it costs less upfront, but really more importantly, and these two things work in conjunction, for the same reason we sit crammed in like sheep on commercial airplanes, to maximize the number of paying customers per trip. So, as is often the case in life, just follow the money.